Hey, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 12, which is on performance management, which just means as a supervisor, how do we manage the performance of our employees? And so we'll just jump right into it. So there's a kind of basic process, okay, that really is involved in managing almost anything. In the first is they call it setting the stage. I would just say, setting expectations, telling people what their job is and setting them up to be successful by giving them the things they need and helping them understand their job. And then providing feedback to people as they're doing it, saying this is good or this could use improvement, and controls, which just means um, providing them a means, I guess, of understanding again how they're doing and what to do about it if they're not. And then from the supervisor's standpoint, controlling the behavior, meaning making sure it stays on task with what the overall goal is. Monitoring performance regularly and then providing guidance and direction as needed. So that pattern, I mean, it's obvious, right? But that's how we manage performance in our employees. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was a performance appraisal, which is just sort of like an assessment of how well someone's doing. The definition they give here in the textbook is that it's systematic, meaning that there's some process in place so that it's consistently done, sometimes once a year, some places have more, and that it's consistently applied to all employees. Not that we necessarily want to compare one employee to another. What we'd like to do is compare employees' performance with what we expect or performance standards. And then I think it's really important that we provide regular feedback, like I mentioned previously. That way, people aren't completely surprised by their appraisal, right? So if you've been telling them or not telling them anything all along, and then at the end of a year, you sit them down and say, "Oh, you're really terrible in all these ways," that's not really fair to them, right? In other words, if you're providing them feedback along the way, then the appraisal just becomes this more formal opportunity to talk about what they're doing, how well they've maybe been uh, listening to and acting upon that feedback as they go. So there's a couple, I guess, ways to do appraisals. The most common and most formal one would be the supervisor doing the appraisal. Usually it's their immediate supervisor, the person who works closest to them. And that second bullet point is an important one that really often doesn't happen, which is the supervisor must be trained to use the appraisal instrument. So if there's a form or some sort of process that an organization wants to use for appraisal, they need to train their supervisors so they know how to do it and they're doing it consistently. It can be a little bit frustrating, and it can also mean the data that you collect through appraisals means very little if everybody isn't trained to do it the same way. And then some organizations do what's called a pooled appraisal, where like a group of supervisors, if somebody works for more than one supervisor, or sometimes like a department level appraisal where, some people will have the job of being appraisers, and they will kind of work together in a group to appraise employees' work. Other types of performance appraisal include peer evaluations, where your coworkers provide evaluations. This is kind of awesome sometimes, but also other times it can be, I don't know, hurtful to people if they get judged in a way that they're not happy with by their peers. And then there's what's called 360-degree evaluations. This is where we collect data from all the people that the employee deals with or works with. That can include customers, vendors that you work with, your supervisors, your peers, people who report to the employee. So um, this is a pretty cool way. It's just a lot of work, and it can be challenging, but it can give the employer and the employee kind of a broader perspective on where they are, what they're doing well, what they need to improve. Then there's self-evaluations, right? Asking people to rate themselves. So a lot of times organizations will use more than one of these approach. And usually, it's like the supervisor's appraisal is usually the one thing that happens for sure. And then these other types of approaches can be used to give a more broad-based or a more, in some case, narrow, a more pinpointed type of appraisal. So here's some ways businesses measure job performance, and a lot of them depend upon the nature of the job. Job knowledge, I think down about 2/3 of the way on the first column, safety. Some jobs, safety is kind of this big thing. And so if you have safety issues, then that could really dock you points on your appraisal. Even at the end of the list here, you can see like appearance. What do they show up looking appropriate for work? And then a whole bunch of others, which I won't read them all to you, but recognize that there's many, many factors that organizations can use to measure the performance of their employees. And it's an important conversation to have as management, what those factors are for your organization and why. Anybody who's ever been through an appraisal process knows that they're not perfect. And here's some of the issues that they have. Sometimes two different people will read the appraisal instrument or form and have a different idea of what that means. Then you get those appraisers that are really severe, or you have the ones that are really lenient, right? Those people that are like, nobody can ever be perfect. And another one that's like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so they give everybody good ratings. And then things like the halo effect and the horn effect. So like the halo effect could be things like, we want to give everybody that works in a certain group a good rating because we think that group is good, or things like that. So we know it's imperfect, and those are some of the problems we've identified. So when we do an appraisal meeting, especially if we're doing like a formal one, it's important that we kind of lay out why we're doing it and the purpose of the whole meeting. It's very frustrating, think about it, as an employee, when you're in this meeting, but it's not really clear why or what it's for. Then you're going to review what the employee has done, and then proceed to areas of improvement. And then you need to get buy-in from the employee on the things that need correction or improvement. So that can be hard if you have a really hard-nosed person who's like, I'm perfect and you're just being stupid. But it's really valuable if you can get them to say, yeah, I recognize that that's a challenge I have as well. And that's why a self-appraisal can sometimes be helpful. I've had supervisors that are like, hey, write out for me 3 things you think you're really good at and 3 things that you think you could use improvement on. And then in our appraisals, they would usually just focus on those 3 things that I recognized, unless there was some kind of major thing I was not seeing. Anyway, so that's these bullet points. Again, I won't read them all, but these are kind of how appraisal meetings, these are good ways to set them up and conduct them. Really, in the modern workplace, there's a lot of emphasis on coaching employees. And what that means is, rather than just telling people what to do and giving orders, kind of the old school way, this is more like providing, I guess, giving clear instructions on what someone's job is, and then helping them to achieve that. That's the idea of coaching. It's kind of like a coach on a team. They can't get in there and play the game for you, but they are going to give you some exercises and some work that's going to help you get better. And then they might even give you a playbook, right, to tell you how things are going to be done. Same concept in employment. And then this is a little different than just measuring performance. This would be like managing performance. And so some ideas about how organizations promote people. So sometimes people promote from within. If you have a good system that trains people well, then and prepares them for leadership, then this is a really good process. It also lets you only promote people that you already kind of know about and you understand their performance, and it's motivational. If people know there's a chance to be promoted, they will often work for it. Occasionally, you won't have any suitable candidates from within, so you may have to hire someone from outside to fill those positions. But that's a good process, is promoting people from within. Typical criteria that organizations use: seniority, which is length of service. Of course, that's got good things and bad things. It does reward loyalty, and it reduces discrimination and things like that. If you just say, hey, whoever's been here the longest gets promoted. But it's also pretty frustrating if you've ever worked at a place that does this, when someone gets promoted above you and everybody knows that they're lazy or not competent, but because they've been there the longest, they get promoted. So it can be discouraging in some ways. So another way that they promote is what's called merit-based performance, which is the quality of the employee's job performance. Again, this is good, but it can be challenging to have good measures of merit, right? Again, because of those reasons we mentioned earlier with appraisals, where you might have one supervisor that gives everybody super high marks and someone else who's really hard on people. And so we'd say we're promoting the person who's the best, but really we might just be promoting the person with that when they were in the lower levels had an easy supervisor. And then ability, right? How someone can, we believe their potential to perform the higher level tasks, but that's challenging too, because knowing that for sure can always be difficult. One last thing to think about in this chapter is compensation programs. And so the idea is, what is the best way to compensate or pay our employees? Do we just give a raise to people who we see are doing a good job? Do we have a more rigid system that's based on some factors that we think are most important? Where I work at the college, Eastern Arizona College, we have a system that in essence gives us pay raises as we gain more education and as we are here longer. So it's based on longevity and education level. And that's great, but sometimes that means that we have teachers making more money than other teachers who are clearly stronger and better than them. But that's not how the system works. The plus side is it's really straightforward. People can look at it and say, all right, so if I want to get a pay raise, I'll either need to get more education or just stay here longer. So those are the trade-offs. So anyway, so this is some of the objectives of compensation programs. And the big one is right here: to eliminate pay inequities and minimize dissatisfaction. If we're doing it right, then the compensation becomes kind of a non-issue. It's just there, and everybody knows how you get paid, and they feel like they're being paid fairly. Another thing compensation does is it's part of recruiting, right? If we pay well, then we want to that'll help us attract and retain good talent to the company. But we also want to control labor costs. So we want to find that balance point where we can attract the right people, but we're not paying so much more than everybody else that we're not competitive with our costs of our products and things anymore. And then one thing that's not on here, but that I think is important, is we need to make sure our compensation plan works toward the overall company goals. I've worked places where they pay bonuses for certain things, and then those things sort of work against the company's overall strategic plan. And so, for example, they might pay people, overtime just for being there, but not necessarily for doing something more or doing something needed. So you'll see people that will just they'll do overtime, but they won't actually really do much more work. Or here at the college, we pay overload to teachers if they teach more than their allotted number of classes, which is good, but we need to make sure that they're classes that the college actually needs and that students actually need, or else we can just be wasting money. Anyway, so that is chapter 12. And hopefully this little video is helpful as you go and read the chapter and consider some of the concepts that are taught in the chapter. Hope you have a great week.